Greetings, Darklings, from across the interweb. It is once again I, the Duchess, Precious Ken, here for the Sounds and Shatters podcast. And wow, we have a special one today, a very big one I'm excited to talk about. Before we roll in that, I don't have an unboxing, and I want to get right into it, but I figure we'll give a shout out instead to Scary Black. My dear friend Elby has just put out a new single, and it is phenomenal. Very freaky, scary, old school goth feel from Louisville, Kentucky. Highly recommend. Check that out. So, the surprise guest for today is none other than Valor of the band Christian Death, one of the most influential and prolific bands to our scene, our genre, and in such a broad sense, because Christian Death has changed in its sound and where it kind of within the spectrum so much over the years and influenced so many. Valor, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
First off, why don't you just give us a brief news update of what you've been up to the last few years and why you're excited to start talking about some new music we have to look forward to.
Well, and actually in 2 weeks, our new album comes out, which is actually a follow-up to the last album, Evil, The Root of All Evolution. And that story this is a continuation story. Evil Becomes Ruled is the new album, and that is the latest saga in the story of evil on the planet Earth. And the last album, basically, the first song begins like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago or more, who knows how much time it really was, where evil was written down in books like the Book of Enoch, and also our reference for the very first song primarily comes from the Emerald Tablets. Now, I'm not going to discuss about the Emerald Tablets. People can look that up and research it. It's quite a long story in detail. But it refers to beings coming from the stars and either going into the earth or into the ocean and coming up sporadically to torment man, to steal and pillage things from man, including, human beings, women and children included, for their own devices. And of course, this is referred to in biblical text as the Nephilim, or these similar creatures. But there's other stories that permeate throughout all of religious mankind's history of religion, all the various religions in the Far East, in the Middle East, the Native Americans, the islanders, the Pacific Rim people. There are these stories of similar contacts.
Sure, and even Greek and Roman and whatnot, the idea of gods or higher beings, what have you, putting their influence of it is, yes, worldwide in scope.
And so the big point that we tried to make here is, where did evil actually come from? Because if you look at, I use my reference of what's right and wrong and what seems to be the way to look for guidance is the natural order of things, the way the animals live. What do they do? And how are we different from them? And the only difference that I actually see between us and animals is our ego. And our ego is what makes us think that we are more special than animals. And our ego is what makes us think that creatures from another being, another planet, or God, or the gods, have looked down upon us as being the only creatures on the planet to be worthy of their recognition. Yeah. And so that, I think, in the ego issue is where evil comes into the story. And whether or not it was instilled on us by creatures or beings or gods, or whether it is just something that is a side effect of the fact that we have managed to use our hands and our language to make us excel technologically, whereas other creatures do not, or at least not to the level that we have. I mean, apes and various creatures do use technology of their own kind, which is probably millions of years old. But where does evil actually come from is the question that we raise. And so the last album refers to evil as it's referred to in texts the oldest texts, going back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is probably the oldest written text that we're aware of. So that album refers to evil from an unknown source up to the present time. The new album is the continuation from this present time on into the future. And the last 5 years that we were talking about, this is what our whole existence is being, is to raise this point, and we've been living that since the last album. And we knew that before we even finished the last album that we had songs left over and concepts that we needed to carry on into the future. And that was the album that we now have. We finished writing all the lyrical content and most of the music in 2019. We were recording our last tracks for the new album and on February 10th, 2020. And that was when Corona was more than just a story from China. It started to hit our shores. But even at that stage, we were not in the lockdown stage. No one knew what was going to happen. Right. We were under the illusion or the assumption that we would be able to get the new album out by May of 2020. So jump a bit forward of that. That didn't happen. The whole year of 2020 was a dive bomb. And then we didn't even have a deal at that point. We weren't sure where we were going to go with the new album, but we had it pretty much recorded. And I've been saying until February 10th. And then after that, when we realized that there wasn't any hope for any of the plans that we had for the rest of the year, we just took our time, and we eventually, decided to go back with our old friends at Season and Mist, who we worked with several previous records, and that kind of worked out really good because they were very excited with working with the new album. And of course, part of the deal is that we would also re-release our back catalog, which we were thrilled to do because a lot of those pieces were not available for a very long time, and now it's been consolidated into one place where it's easier to find at Season and Mist. And also being able to add more artwork to the concept of Christian death as it began with at least from the perspective Roz and I had back in Catastrophe Ballet, which Catastrophe Ballet, I must say, also leans to the same concept of what we're alluding to in these last two albums, being that both Roz and I didn't have much of a positive outlook on the future of humanity, and that's hence the Catastrophe Ballet title was kind of referred to of a concept that I had with the Pompeii 99 concept, which was again apocalyptic visions, and we've referred to that in and out, only taking sections of what leads to the apocalypse in all of the records that we have up to this point. So every record is basically touching on the topics that either are directly related to an apocalyptic scenario or focusing in on the key points that have led humanity to come to these sort of finalizing thoughts that may potentially eventualize or not. But the last couple of years have been kind of what we expected, and that's kind of where our lyrics were referring to. And we were hoping that we would get it out before what we expected to happen at around the year 2020 before it happened. So that's why we're planning on releasing the album in May. And of course, that kind of changed. So we're a little bit late off the mark, but I don't know. I guess you're getting the idea of where this is all going.
And something you just said there, that's so fascinating. The idea of going back to those first two Christian death albums and really thinking about that at that time, here you were, younger and having this prophetic idea that this is what the journey of humanity was going to come to at some point, and then getting a chance to go into that story this many years later where you've had, so many albums and an epic career in between, but I feel like a little bit, look, we were talking about this back then, that this was what could have been the future for humanity then in those early albums. And I've never really thought about that. Now I need to go back and re-listen again a bit, because it's to think about that and look at it.
I'll interject if you too before I forget here, since you're referring to that again. It's like Catastrophe Ballet was the actual ballet, the ballet of the catastrophe happening, whereas Ashes, the next album, was the aftermath. And so we have these talking points that go through all the albums that all relate. And this is why it was exciting to put the album out as the back catalog out as a continuous. You could listen to it from album to album, and I think you'd be able to follow the strings and connect the dots a lot easier.
Yeah, I want to jump around a little bit and kind of where I thought I was going to go on the flow of the interview for the questions, but when you bring that up, you have a body of work that you hit that point where you have the ability to re-release fan favorite albums now as remasters. And I'd be curious to kind of get your take, what a remaster means to you in that sense, that obviously enough people are still invested and interested in that material. I was even talking today a little bit, we had a discussion on Facebook about how do we encourage new fans and young people to find classic albums that inspired us and have that reach them in 2022. How involved are you in kind of the remastering process when they do something like that with one of your records? And does it hold a emotional involvement or investment of any kind, hearing that one of your albums is wanted to be brought back into the light that way?
I think the first thing that goes through my head is, how can we make sure that we can maintain its integrity?
Right.
And at the same time, of course, when I'm saying that is that our mixes for some of these older records, some of them were only available on vinyl or cassette or CD.
Yeah.
And even now, even the new album, we focused on the album of a vinyl. We focused on what the sound would be on vinyl, because at this point in time, ironically, even with all the technology we have, minus the scratches and the pops of vinyl, it's still the best sound quality audio that we can get of anything. And the only reason that is because the market has not allowed the technology to excel, or at least be utilized in a way that's practical. And what I mean by that is that when CDs first come out, a lot of people were complaining that the sound quality, the frequency response was not anything like vinyl. And people, there was one guy who was, I've forgotten his name, but he was recently protesting against Joe Rogan for doing what he did about taking ivermectin or something on, and saying that he would do that, and so this country / rock guy came out, you know what I'm talking about, complaining about him, saying that he should be taken off of Spotify because of whatever.
Yeah, I think it was Neil Young or something.
Okay, so Neil Young was the most instrumental person in complaining about CDs when they first came out. He's one of these kind of guys that complains about a lot of things, by the way. And so he didn't like, he complained about saying that digital would never be, the quality of vinyl. Well, I don't agree with that, and I didn't agree with that at the time. I knew, because when we were recording stuff for the first time in digital, we were doing it at 48 kilohertz. Mm-hmm. Now, CDs are only recorded at 44.1. So that already makes them at a disadvantage frequency response-wise to a vinyl. But nowadays, when we record in digital, we're recording at 92 kilohertz, and there's no way vinyl could ever match the frequency response of 92 kilohertz. But the big dilemma is 92 kilohertz uses up a lot of bandwidth. It uses up a lot of memory, yeah. And they haven't quite, decided how we can sell 92 kilohertz to the public. Not that the public really even cares, because most people in the generations coming up now are so used to listening to music on either their laptop or their cell phone, they haven't got a clue what good frequency response is. But if they were to find out, there would be a massive shift in how we listen to music, and I'm just hoping for that day to come.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think the other part to me is I still I buy most of my albums digital now, on the computer when like you said, on my phone, so I can take it with me. But if I really enjoy a new band, I'll purchase it on LP and get the album for the reason you said. Yes, the sound, but also it's the ritual to me. I want to take the album out. I want to look at the liner. I want to smell it. I want to set it down and feel the needle drop. I think there's something to be said for that aspect of it, that I think it helps make music be a connection rather than something in your earbuds. I think that's the other big thing of whether you're talking vinyl or CDs or whatnot, is the way that people share it. So
in this digital age where we communicate digitally, we do most things digitally, that we're living virtually. We're living in a virtual reality. And to have something that's three-dimensional in your hand while you're hearing frequencies touch air, which is a three-dimensional thing because the frequencies bounce around the room in 3D. And if you have something in your hand to add the artist's touch on it, the texture of the paper. I mean, since the very beginning, we've always chosen whether it was going to be a textured paper, whether it was going to be glossy, whether it was going to be rice paper, see-through stuff with our lyrics, whatever it was going to be. We felt that was the character of the music that we wanted to emphasize by whatever means. When we did a show, we would think, well, what incense should we burn tonight for this show because we're putting on this thing? When we were first doing shows and playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go and things like that, when we first started playing out as Christian Death, on our very first show, we even gave away food. We even had our support band is that we set up a big buffet and we created all the food ourselves, and we just let everybody come in and eat from the buffet. That was us. And we let them take an hour just sitting there eating and drinking wine, and then we did our show. And so we wanted to have our experience like we would love our music to be in any situation, and all sensual,
five senses, yeah,
all senses,
Yeah.
And if sex can happen, we would try to incorporate that too, but usually that can't happen.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. It is kind of a big foodie person and smell it. That's incredible. That's a really neat aspect to hear of it. So another thing I want to talk on, I'm going to go back to the beginning here in a little bit history, is I think of you guys as a proto-goth band. We did an interview a little while back with Rodney Orpheus of the Cassandra Complex, that I kind of was saying in the same way that there wasn't such a thing as goth when you started, really. I mean, and you were just trying to capture and play a concept or ideal that later people applied that word to occasionally, or metal or what have you. What was the original drive or intention with Christian Death that you were trying to do? Because when I think of it, I always more kind of think of the ideal of punk rock. I mean, the very name itself, Christian Death, is a challenge, of the status quo. What was the, I don't know, original goal when you really were starting out?
The scene in LA at the time was very much a punk orientated scene. The punk scene actually in America was several years behind England. When it took off in LA at the same time as we were getting ready to do Catastrophe Ballet, we actually had some of the songs written for that. The scene was very much there was the American punk scene, and there was the English punk scene. A lot of the English bands that were coming to LA at the time had already kind of like peaked in England. And then when they came to LA, there was always people waiting for them several years later. And it took off again for a lot of bands. And in that time, there were bands like The Exploited and Angelic Upstarts, bands that we played with. Then we started getting bands over we had who was the first band that we played with? With Specimen, and then I remember we were going to do a show with it doesn't matter. There was so many bands coming over from England at that time who were. See, we had in LA there was the death rock scene, of course. So and Pompeii 99 and Christian Death and 45 Grave and Crown of Thorns, and these were the California bands that were doing like just dark stuff.
Sure.
And of course, where that came from, I don't really know. It was probably just Christian Death itself that inspired several of those bands, like Crown of Thorns. 45 Grave, I'm not sure exactly, the story behind them. But when Specimen and Sisters of Mercy and New Order and all bands like that were coming, we realized that we had more symbiosis with those kind of bands than we did with a lot of the punk bands.
Sure.
So it was quite simple for us to fit in with that. And that's why the very first show we did when we left Europe, when we left California, was to go to London, and we played at the Batcave with Specimen. Because we basically did a show with them in LA, and we got on really well, and we kept in touch. And then that was, once we went to England, it was like that was the scene. It was the goth scene that we were accepted into. We never even knew what the goth term was. In fact, the second show that we did was in Holland, and in Holland they were calling us country punk. I mean, there was lots of different names. There was lots of different names that were being thrown around, but goth was something that was an English thing. That basically, we sort of, the label was basically just stuck to us as we, came by the assembly line.
Sure. And I've always said, I mean, to me, especially nowadays where genre is splintered so much, and as a music review writer, I always say that genre is useful in the sense that if you like band A, you might like band B. And anything discussion to me beyond that is really kind of wankery, like trying to break down the details. It's really just about helping people find something else that they're inspired by and they enjoy. To me, that's what genre is good for. So you have had, as I brought up, a career that has spanned decades and have watched things change, whether you're talking about record labels, technology, distribution, all of these things in music. What do you feel is the biggest change in how music is getting produced in 2022, both positive and negative?
Well, with the advent of Pro Tools, the music changed. That's when the music went digital in a big way. But the real change was with people being able to, go out and buy a desktop computer and record loops, and then we have hip hop. Not from the original roots of hip hop, of course, which go back into the 70s and stuff, long before, the advent of technology. But technology made it easy for people to realize that they could make simple tunes and make money without even having to spend money in a recording studio.
Yeah.
And what we ended up with was very poor quality recordings, and people didn't really care. But for the connoisseurs of fine music, such as myself, I found that very irksome.
Sure.
Of course, I appreciate raw talent by itself. It's not that. It's just that it's when people, when everything's a gimmick, it kind of loses its flavor to me. It's like McDonald's food to me. I mean, a lot of people may like it at McDonald's, but I don't. I like quality food that I cook myself, or it's prepared, nicely. Sure. As an analogy. And so I look at music the same. For me, it has to have like the air of the ritual, like you say. It has to be performed well. It has to be written well. It has to feel something. Can't be just a catchy hook that's as simple as, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and then somebody puts a beat to it, and all of a sudden it makes $1 million. Sure. That's kind of frustrating for people who struggle, who are extremely talented artists who just basically go nowhere and end up, being miserable and committing suicide. There's many people I know.
Yeah.
And so, I guess that was just me venting about the technology side of it going crappy. But a lot you could say the same thing for a lot of the jazz musicians who didn't like rock and roll in the 50s. And of course, I like rock and roll. Yeah.
No, I take your point, and I think that's a very good point, that we have lost some of the structure, I guess, in a way that goes into it, that you had to, like you said, have a good idea, a good concept, get together with people that were all talented, practice a lot, and invest. It had to cost a lot, both in time, energy, money, sweat, to even produce a simple record or single. And nowadays, like you said, you can have a pretty decent comparable home studio for, $1,500, $2,000, and put out a single every other month and crank it out. And even if it's very good, you're right, there is something lost to a point in the amount of cost emotionally and physically that used to go into it, that I think added something to the music. I mean, anything that has a cost helps establish its value too, I suppose.
Well, it's like the difference between making a pair of pajamas out of pure satin or synthetic.
Sure.
The pure satin, you're not going to sweat. It's going to feel better, and it's going to last longer, and maybe costing more money. And of course, the little silkworms have to work hard at it. It's just another analogy. There's many that I could, throw at you that of just quality.
Yeah, or even just the difference in sound of, you record something on a Leslie rotating reverb amplifier versus a very comparable effect you can get as a plugin for $20 now,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, can you really hear the difference? I don't know. Some people would say yes, some people would say no, but I think that there is one, if for no other reason, your mentality, because you're playing through a Leslie amplifier.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think if I had a Leslie in front of me, or a plug-in version of it, I'm pretty sure that I would get better sounds out of the real thing. Only because I can move the mic in different positions. I can put it against the board of the cabinet and get vibrations. And I like to experiment with things like that. When you have a software, you have the limitations of the software, and you can't go beyond that. Like, for example, with the piano. And I've used this technique on the new album, is that I have a piano behind me here, and I open up the back of it, and you can't see it because we're over there, but it's if you lift up the lid, I can go in there and I can get a toothbrush, a hairbrush, a guitar string, a screwdriver, a knife, a comb, and drumsticks, and I can play music from the inside of the piano. You know what I mean? And I did that on the song, which is the title track of the album, Evil Becomes Rule. Now, if you hear that, that's the inside of my piano in my house. I couldn't do that with a plugin.
Right.
I could never create anything like that with any plugin anywhere in the world right now. I'm just giving you an example of the limitations of the technology. Now, having said that, I could also contradict myself by saying that there are certain technologies that have come in a really good way, and that is in the plugins for things like a Fairchild. Now, a Fairchild is a compressor. It's basically, and many people may not know what it is, but it's a way to keep your voice inside of a balanced framework. It's not too loud and not too quiet. It keeps it, and sometimes you can even change the textures. In fact, you can definitely change the textures of tones and make things sound richer and beautiful, and you can use it like an instrument. And it's subtle, but it feels so nice when you have a good one. Well, Fairchild, when they first came out, were probably $25,000 way back in the 80s, which is probably comparable to $75,000 to $100,000 today. You can buy a software plugin, provided you have the hardware that goes with it, which could cost you a couple of $1,000s or less. But to buy the plugin is probably $200. Now, the reason I mention that is because the Root of All Evolution, the previous album, we recorded that at Gateway Studios. And Gateway Studios is owned by, well, we did the mastering for that at Gateway, and that was owned by a guy called Bob Ludwig, who's the #1 mastering engineer in the world. And when I went into his studio, the explanation was, I noticed that they had the Fairchild, and then they had 1176s, and then they had Neve devices. The whole place is covered with all his equipment, and none of it was on. And so we started mastering the record, and he had his computers going, and I just said to him, I noticed that none of your hardware is on. And he says, I don't use it anymore. I said, what? We're paying thousands of dollars to be here and you're not using this equipment? And he basically says, well, the big pieces of equipment make a lot of noise just sitting in the room.
Right.
They create a lot of heat in the room. They use a lot of electricity, and the plugins sound exactly the same. And I was just completely blown away. I mean, this is like the top mastering engineer in the world,
Sure.
not using this expensive equipment because the plugins sound just as good, but they.
I've heard people say on both sides, like you said, I mean, engineers that I know that are top of the line and great, some that'll say, no, there's a huge difference. And I have some that'll say, there's absolutely none. You're fooling yourself, Ken. It sounds identical. And I think too, you have a lot of opportunity and new technology with it, with the plugins, to overlap things that maybe you wouldn't to create a new sound. But you're right, there is the other side of that you hit the wall of being able to step outside and do something creative, like you were talking about, miking up inside the piano or the back of it, or you just can't do that with a piece of electronics, you know? So no, that's really interesting. And so would you say, you said the negative, for the positive side, would that be they would be the same thing, both the negative and the positive, is the way that technology can allow you access to, in the moment, especially when you're writing songs, you sitting there in your studio like that, you can have any combination of amp, effect, instrument that you could possibly dream right at your fingertips. And when you take the mind of a songwriter like you, that's a powerful tool.
Yeah, well, you know, there are the limitations of technology. I mean, I'd have to be a hypocrite to say that I don't like technology, because the electric guitar was my second love. Drums were my first love. I was playing drums from the age of 5, and I always wanted to play other things, and so I just started playing. I never had a guitar for a while. It was electric. I had acoustic guitars as a child, but when I finally got an electric guitar, it was like my world changed. And that's technology. That's it's distortion pedals. It's, chorus pedals and wah-wahs and all these great, technological things that created a whole new thing. Like synthesizers, they create sounds that we can't create with any, organic instrument at all. Yeah. And so we've used some of that too on the new album, so we anything that can create the things that you want to create is like, art is art. There's no rules. It's just a question of like creating something that you're proud of, because you know that it's going to have a reaction. And that's what makes me proud. It's not, oh, look what we can do. It's just like, we've just created this feeling that probably was never created before. And if we like it, somebody else is bound to like it. Yeah. And I approach that with cooking too. It's like, I like cooking for myself, but I enjoy cooking for other people more, because I know that I'm going to enjoy it when I cook it, and to share the experience with somebody. That's what's great about playing live, that we're sharing that all the sweat that we put into it to make people feel good, because we want them to feel good. We want to feel, that's the reward, is making people happy.
Yeah, no, I think that leads in really well to another question I want to ask you about. And that's, you take, again, a storied career like yours, where you've played huge festivals, in front of a lot of people. You've made decades worth of albums. Is there something in 2022 that you still dream of accomplishing in music? Something that you still, an itch that you have, that I want to see this done, in part of my career?
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is that I've always been a film buff, and I've always liked visuals. And I've been saying for a long time, even though we haven't had the resources, that my ultimate goal would be that we could have a video for every song that we've ever made.
Yeah.
Of course, that involves, unfortunately, lots of time and money. But that's what I would like to see. That's kind of the goal I have.
That's awesome, and that would really be incredible. I really like the newest video that you put out here. I thought it was a very interesting take. And one thing going along with what we were talking about a moment ago, that is something that technology has also changed in, where in the 80s or 90s, you're right, doing even a music video of 3.5, 4 minutes or something like that was an enormous cost of production. Whereas it still is to a point to get a truly professional, the quality that you're looking for. But you also can, with a really decent, affordable camera, if you do DIY things to add into that, it's much more affordable than it used to be for almost any artist to produce a video of what their vision is. And that maybe does open possibilities within your career of having that dream realized, I imagine.
For sure, the technology is much better, but still, even though a good camera, if you want to be competitive on, to get a good camera where it's television quality, there's a lot of shows that won't play certain videos if they're not at a certain standard, because
Right.
it just, that's their standard that they set for them, for their audience, and that usually entails having at least a $10,000 camera just to begin with,
Sure.
you know. And the problem with those cameras, if you either own them or you rent them, and even if you rent them just for a couple of days, you're already into thousands of dollars just to rent them.
And you're
You
on
know,
a time crunch then.
yeah, and then because of the format and the amount of data that they use, you need massive computers systems to edit them. So you can't just go and do that with a home desktop. You need
True.
you need to have powerful systems, and that entails money. And we haven't invested a lot of money in that stuff. That's why we still use other people, to help with certain things. But we try to do what we can with, within reason.
Sure. I'm
Um,
gonna, no, that's a great answer and a really interesting thought that gets me going now. If I'm like, I wonder who I could reach out to and talk to make a series of Christian death videos happen for this new album. I have a dream now too. So,
I also had
um,
an idea the other day. Is like, for example, is that we were going to release another. Well, the label is releasing another single for the song "Braxis We Are"
mhm,
next week, but there's no video because we just don't have time to do it because we got the tour coming starting next week.
yeah,
And and I said to the label, I apologize, but it wasn't part of the plan, even though that would be nice if we could, but there's no way we're going to get a video done. We will do a video for that song and every song on the album, but it's going to come out throughout the course of the year.
sure. So, speaking of which, the tour, and I want to talk specifically about that in a minute, but a few years back, I was traveling with my wife Rachel, and we went to Athens, Greece. And I went into a club called Death Disco, and it was a really eye-opening and experience for me. It reminded me of back in the day goth clubs I would go to, where the total lack of pretension. Everybody's just in t-shirts and the jeans, but knows every single song and is dancing to them. And a lot of people there were talking to me. I was just making new friends, talking to musicians about Christian death. And I remember like the impact it had, that just people kept coming up to me and bringing Christian death up to me. And I wondered if you have a place from all over the world that you've traveled, all of the cities that you've been to, that holds a sacred to you, that kind of reflects a bit your soul coming from America, of all the lands you've gone to.
Well, Greece, as you mentioned, it definitely has a special place in my heart. We've been there several times and we've always loved it. Mexico is magical. Most places in Mexico. The scene in Mexico is people just have it's there's a lot of bands in Germany that if it wasn't for Mexico, we probably never would have heard of them. Just because Mexicans love the goth scene so much.
Another thing I want to ask about here is, in addition to kind of we talked about remasters, nowadays the thing for a lot of bands is remixes. And I know, for example, in 2021, Cleopatra put out a remix of Spectre Love. And a dear friend of mine, and actually our mastering artist for our band, Pete Byrne of the band Kill Shelter, did a remix for that song. How do you feel about, it's as somebody who does songs that people then go back and remix that has that input? um how do you feel about that, hearing your song through another band's prism or vision?
Well, I mean, it's great that people are inspired by things like that.
Mhm.
Nice to know that you've made an impact on other artists, and then they can continue to go on and give people another perspective. It's like back to food again. It's like I like fusion food. You take Japanese food and you mix it with Mexican food, and you've got something completely different. So yeah, I mean, anybody's take on something, it's just art. Like, art is good when it's done tastefully. I've heard some of my songs that were re-recorded by certain people that I don't even care to mention, and I thought it was abysmal.
Sure. A cover isn't always going to be there, and that's different than a remix for sure.
But some people who, I mean, I'm always suspect of covers. If they're just like trying to be an identical version of the song
Right.
and it's just done poorly, then I have no respect for it. If they do something completely different, whether or not it's the same talent thing, as long as they've put something into it that gives it a bit of a spice, then I'm all in.
Yeah.
No matter how simple it is, how talented they are, it just has to have, a magical inspiration that works. I try to create music that not necessarily is an inspiration, but if it's trying to exemplify the music, that's really how we do it. We write lyrics, and the music is the theatrical representation of the emotion behind the lyrics. And if that inspires people, then I guess it works.
So I want to go back here to the new album and kind of focus on one of the things that I heard, especially you hear the first single that came out and the video along with it. I love the fact that you were using almost some very different instrumentation and like world beat organic sounds, then mixed with those very crunchy heavy guitars, and the vocals over them from Matri like had a lot of snarling venomous kind of impact on them. What was the difference for you in coming into this record that you were trying to create sonically with, kind of, we discussed new technology available mixed with some of these older instruments? How was that relating? Because you discussed the idea of the beginning of evil throughout history and into the modern time of it. Was there some purpose behind that from a sound in terms of blending this modern technology with these older organic sounding instrumentations?
Well, it's a history lesson for a start, and at the same time, it's a premonition. And to tell the story, like I said, I referred to earlier, the only way that you can exemplify the emotion is through the sound, because that's how we're giving you. We're giving you words and we're giving you music. So the words are telling you the story to your conscious mind, whereas the music is going to affect your subconscious mind in much the same way as the soundtrack to a film exemplifies the emotion in the music. So in order to create that, we just have to think, well, what is available? What is that sound that I need to hear to make me feel what that line does? Is it a cello? Is it an organ? Is it a piano? Is it a guitar? Is it a synthesizer? Is it, we were literally hitting sticks on tables for some of the recordings, just to get that percussive sound.
How do you mic up a stick on a table?
You just put a mic in, just like you would put it next to a bass drum.
Basically, we're going to wrap up here, and tell me about things that you're excited for coming up to the tour. Are there any big festival dates or anything like that in particular on the tour that people need to be excited to come out and see you for?
Well, this tour was pretty much was supposed to happen in 2009 and 2019. It was supposed to be us and Bauhaus playing at in front of the Queen Mary in Los Angeles. And then in 2019, in the summer or the spring of 2019, Peter Murphy had a heart attack.
Right.
And he had to cancel his shows, and that was one of the shows. So that was postponed until 2020. And then the Corona thing changed that. And so then then they started already looking at bringing other acts in for the year later. And that was going to be another thing in September of 2020. Well, that didn't happen either. But by then it had already morphed. And then they were adding bands like Blondie and Bauhaus again and Morrissey and all that stuff. So here we are coming up to May 14th and 15th of 2022, and that's where we're at now. It's been postponed 3 times now, and that's called the Cruel World Festival, and it's a 2-day festival event at the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles. And the tour that we're doing now started out with just that one show. Mm-hmm. And because we'd already committed ourselves to it 3 years ago, and so finally it's now happening. And so we decided to just build a tour around it, because the last time we went out and did shows traveling and flying around Los Angeles, especially from around the country, especially, with the mandates and stuff, made it very more unpleasant than it usually is to fly. Sure. So we said, well, I basically said, I'm not flying to Los Angeles to do this festival. And I said to management and the band and our agent, and I said, what if we do shows on the way to Los Angeles to do that festival, and then we do some shows on the way back, and that way we don't have to fly. We can make it a lot more fun, and we can bring a lot more gear, because then we can fit in a plane anyway.
Right.
And we can make it a little bit more special theatrically, and bring the things that we really need, including a lot of the stuff that we just don't bring because we're afraid it's going to get broken on a flight. I mean, I've gotten guitars back with forklifts that have been put through them. So flying is always, great trepidation of, this is my baby. You have to put it down below, sir. No, it's coming on the plane with me. No, I've had that fight so many times. And so I just said, no, I'm not doing it this year. We're going to drive, and we're going to bring everything that we want to bring. My mandolin, my violin, all my guitars, all my acoustic guitars, all your guitars, all my Ishi's bass guitars. He's bringing his double bass drum right on,
That's awesome. So to wrap up here, we hit on an hour, and this has been amazing. I really feel like this was great information to express and get out there to both new fans that are just coming upon Christian Death and a lot of your fans that have been with you for a long time. For the new album, we like to always hear spin out to a song. What is the song that you feel like is your baby on this album? Is the song that really stands out to you, that encapsulates the meaning or concept of this newest record that we can share with people?
Well, speaking on behalf of Maichi and myself, we can both say that we don't know what our favorite song is, because we love them all.
I have 5 fingers and I wouldn't cut any of them off. No, I can't.
But there are songs that we know that have had a lot of impact on people since the day we started recording them. Mm-hmm. And I think that the song that seems to be on everybody's lips at the moment is Beautiful. And it's a beautiful song, and we're very proud of that one. And we think it's a very deep, emotional song. And if I listen to it, I can cry.
Well, I'm going to take your advice on that one, and we're going to spin out to Beautiful. Although I will give a shout out here at the end of the interview and say that Elegant Sleep was the one off the set that just got in my head, and I just hear it over and over again. I keep playing it. It's a song I'm very excited about. So expect me to have the written review out for the new Christian Death album very soon, probably by the release of this interview. And Valor, it has been a true honor to have you here coming out to talk to us. Do you have any final parting thoughts that you want to share with your fans?
If the world was really full of people who were all evil, we would be slicing each other up like some horror movie. But we're not. So that tells me that there's a lot of good people in the world. But evil is prevalent, it's afoot, and the only advice I can give you is to believe everything and nothing.
Wonderful. From us here at Sounds and Shadows, this has been Valor of Christian Death. Everybody out there in interweb land, keep it dark, yeah.
I'd like to welcome you all on this sad day as we mourn the loss of our friend, has been taken from us too soon.